The London Underground is a very familiar system to millions of people, particularly those who have to commute through it or use it for leisure services. Its operations become very familiar to the non-enthusiast and the enthusiast alike. One aspect, though, that isn't often seen is, of course, the depot. Here we are at Upminster, out on the eastern edge of the London Underground network, where today we have an open day and a chance to take a look at the workings of the District Line at home level. Upminster is one of two joint depots serving the District Line, and as you can see today from behind me, a marvellous selection of underground rolling stock is here today. There's also, apart from the electric stock, there's some battery locos, of course, as well from the engineering side. We also have the chance to witness a Metropolitan steam locomotive in steam here today. Part of the essential backup on the engineering side of London Underground system is the provision of the battery loco. They're known as battery locos. They can run on batteries and often do when the current is switched off during the night when most of the engineering work takes place. But apart from that, there is also the good old collector shoe for collecting juice during normal operating hours, also building up reserves in the batteries. So they operate on either battery or the mains. Not very often seen by the general public unless you're on a very late night train. You may be standing and suddenly see one of these come rumbling through with a goods train behind, or wagons of ballast, or even rails for refurbishment of the network. They're unseen by many, but they're very, very important in the operation, the secret underground life of London Underground. This particular loco is one of the last built. Many, many years of construction of this particular design. It's been modified over the years. This is a 1985 version built by Metropolitan Camel up in Birmingham. A major problem on the underground system in the 1980s, and something which is hoped can be combated in the 1990s, is the problem of vandalism and graffiti in particular. The answer is hoped to be a new system of painting the stock. Obviously, one of the big developments of the 60s was the provision of the silver tube, where the aluminium body didn't, or the steel body as well, did not have paintwork on there. It was designed to be a new look for the 1960s. Came through in the 50s early on, but 60s was the main time when the red train died on London Underground. Now it's going back to a lighter colour, not going back to the red, there's the blue provision as well, trying to put a new image on the Underground for the 1990s and hopefully combating that ever-present problem of vandalism and graffiti on the lower panels, which has bedeviled the Underground system all the way through the past decade. In 1938, the then 5-year-old London Passenger Transport Board embarked on a programme that could be described as an economical mission. It was to refurbish the District Line by using existing stock. The result was the provision of the Q stock class of 1938. The driving motors built in that time converted from CO and CP cars, very much representing the traditional style of District Line car that existed right the way through to the 1980s. The livery, of course, red. There were other cars also, the R stock, unfortunately none here today in the silver livery, but this really represents the district as I think most people will remember it. One major feature about the Q stock was this reuse of old units. As a result, the coupler had to be the old standard Ward coupler instead of the wedge lock that you'll see on all of the other units around here today. A very old coupling system designed because the trailers and various other items in use on the whole of the Q stock series was of a rather old-fashioned design. The actual driving motor car itself, though, shows classic lines of LT design, a very, very impressive piece of railway hardware, and as I said before, very much reminiscent of the good old days of the District Line. The Q-Stock story came to an end in 1971 with the withdrawal of the final units. This unit, in fact, was one of the very last. This is now, I think, the only operational Q-Stock units. There are a couple of carriages available in museums. There's one in the London Transport Museum, for example, in Covent Garden. It's nice to see the old District Line represented here today. As I said, though, the Q-Stock was a little bit of a cobbled-together exercise. The central trailer, though, is very interesting. A 1935 trailer. It's only a couple of years older than the actual driving motors at either end, but it features a very old design feature with the clerestory roof. It was one of the last clerestory roof rail vehicles to be built. Another interesting feature, many, many years on, we came back to the system, but back in the 1930s, it was pressed to open the doors. That didn't come back until the 1978 D stock. Let's take a look inside at this very interesting piece of railway armour. Inside the car, it's a lovely period piece of mid-1930s London Transport rolling stock. It really is evocative of the older days of the District Line. You can see the The feeling of it is very, very different from the modern-day tube stock and surface stock of 1978 and beyond, as is now standard on the District line. Looking around the vehicle, we've got some lovely bits of design around the vehicle. We also have a route map showing the District line as it was back in 1935 when this vehicle was constructed. Details on the map show the old Middle Circle route out from Olympia round to Latimer Road, and also the South Acton branch out from Acton Town. A lovely piece of discovery, discovered when the paint was stripped down and the old route diagrams were taken off from later years. Also looking around the vehicle, there's some lovely old advertisements, including some 1930s advertisements going through a little closer to the modern day, and even a shot of an advertisement for the Central Line refurbishment program of 30 years ago. All in all, a fascinating vehicle. It's actually owned by London Underground Railway Society. It's maintained as part of the three-car unit, with the two driving motors being owned by London Transport themselves. A nice little example of cooperation between the official preservationists and the enthusiastic but extremely willing amateurs of the LURS. Let's take a look around. As I mentioned earlier, one of the opportunities given by an open day such as this one here at Upminster is the chance to see the kind of thing you don't see in ordinary commuting on the London Underground. An example of that is shown here with these two special trains that we have in here this afternoon. On the left, we have one of the prototype tube trains for the 1990s, and on the right, an experimental track recording train. As you can see, this blue train is quite a radical departure, as it's part of the prototype stock for the 1991 redevelopment of the Central Line. This, of course, is the blue unit, one of the three constructed as part of the prototype trials back in 1986. There's also a red and a green unit. The difference, principally, to the outside observer is, apart from the colour, is the fact that this is a British Rail Engineering Limited production for London Underground. A very rare development for them. Normally, the vehicles are built by Metropolitan Camel, like most of the units we've seen here today, and indeed the other two test units are both in that category. Some of the features of the new prototype tube stock are quite radical. There's a lot of new engineering involved. The bogies underneath are derivations of the technology used on the surface stock with the D78. A lot of design changes have come through in the past 15 years, and that's being reflected now in the prototypes, with the three designs effectively being produced at the end of the day for one complete production run. Various items are being tested out. Here on the blue train, though, it shows some of the features which are the dot matrix destination displays, not just at the front. It's very common in bus technology now for the dot matrix destination displays. Here, though, through the new tube trains, they're going to be in every carriage, which will really help people identify exactly where they are on the underground network, particularly with so many tourists in the London area. So it's an interesting introduction to the future of London Underground in the 1990s, the experimental blue train. Inside the experimental prototype tube train, it's a very, very different ambience to the environment you normally see on the Underground. As you can see, there is a large amount of floor space. The design of this car is really to reflect the maximum standee potential with just single transverse seats rather than the usual double. The usual provision of longitudinal seats further down. But a very, very light and airy feel to the actual carriage. British Rail Engineering, as I said, built this one. There were two other competing prototypes in the form of the Metro Camel designs, known as the red and the green trains. And a lot of very new ideas brought in by the two builders in the three units. As to which is going to be the style chosen for the tube stock for the 1990s, who can tell at the present time? But this is a very interesting attempt by BREL to reflect their interpretation of the standard London Transport tube interior. You see one or two major changes from whatever tube stock you may be familiar with on the various lines that you know in London. The grab rail is continuous right the way along the ceiling, right over the doors as well. Sometimes it can be a bit of a problem in these days of very crushed conditions, often on tube lines, to actually get a grip as the train is in motion. So the grab rail there is very importantly all the way along the train. You see the clean lines of it, very, very clean plastics used around an interesting maquette, very different from the standard London Transport maquette. Also alcoves down by the seats, a little bit of an armrest. All in all, it's a very interesting alternative to perhaps some of the design we've seen so far. Who knows whether this or any of the others could be the standard for the 1990s on London Underground. Well, now we come to the current state of the art on the operational side of the Underground, with the experimental designs already in the pipeline. At the moment, this is the current latest model, the 1983 tube stock as used on the Jubilee line. Originally designed at Acton between 1980 and 1983, it went into production in 1983, with the first unit being delivered, the first of 15. The original plan on the Jubilee line was to use a mix and match arrangement with partly 1983 tube stock and partly also 1972 Mark II. Later on, it was decided that the Bakerloo needed upgrading on its rolling stock, and the idea was then to order more 1983 tube units to fully convert the Jubilee to modern train units. The idea then was to order another 16.5 units to give a full complement for the Bakerloo line. The 1983 stock features a lot of interesting developments. Essentially, it's a development from the breakthrough in the 1973 stock, with some extra information derived from the D78 stock, particularly down at bogie level, with the 1980, or rather the D78 bogie being adapted for tube use on the 1983 tube stock. Other features also are the single leaf doors with passenger operation rather than the traditional two-way doors, two-part doors. And overall, the 1983 does have very much a feel of a cut-down tube version of the D78 rolling stock. Well, alongside the experimental blue train, we have another rarity in the form of the track recording unit. Itself, actually, from an original rare combination of 1960 tube stock, which operated on the Hainault-Woodford section of the Central line for some time. Well, these two particular driving motors have been coupled with a 1973 trailer to form a track recording unit converted by British Rail Engineering in 1987, a link there with the experimental blue tube train. The original 1960 units built by Cravens of Sheffield, a rare departure for London Underground, going to Cravens for construction of tube stock. The actual role of the track recording train is, as the name suggests, to record the track conditions over the network. It can be seen anywhere around the network, obviously, though it's not often that the general public get to see it. Inside, it's fully computerized with some very, very high-tech information systems to actually interpret information for the engineer. Let's take a look on board. Well, there aren't many tube trains that come complete with a VDU screen mounted on the desk in front of you. Has some very interesting implications for maybe putting executive trains on the network. No, it's a very, very high quality investment that London Underground have got here jointly with British Rail. This test train is doing a lot of very good work around the network, trying to identify the problems with any problems they have with the track. Well, from all of this high technology, let's take a look now at something of a slightly earlier generation. We joined the London Underground test crew from Ealing Common Depot in the cab of battery electric loco number L44 for a run over the district to Barking. As L44 hauls slowly out of the depot yard, we can see that it heads one of the most unusual trains ever to run in passenger service on the Underground system. Behind the engine is an early BR Mark II open second, followed up by a Mark I brake second. Both vehicles are on loan from BR's Director of Civil Engineering, although painted in a unique LT livery. Also, both vehicles are running on B4 bogies and are plated for 100 miles an hour running. Bringing up the rear of this somewhat unlikely ensemble is Metropolitan Railway 044 tank number 1 from Quainton Road.